If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
Robert Schoch has a Ph.D. in Geology and Geophysics from Yale and has been working in Egypt focusing on the Great Sphinx and Great Pyramids since 1990. Based on his geological studies, Robert has determined that the Sphinx origins go back to pre-dynastic times, thousands of years older than previously thought. In recent years, Dr. Schoch has expanded his research to encompass pyramids and associated structures around the world. Dr. Robert Schoch, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Now, Dr. Robert Schoch, just tell me about how you got involved with the, with your research into the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids.
Well, I always loved ancient history, so this was something I had a passion for going back to childhood, but I didn't actually pursue it initially. I went off and I got my graduate degree in geology and geophysics. I was doing geology. I was hired at Boston University. Several years after I got to Boston University, I had a colleague who knew an independent Egyptologist. And this independent Egyptologist since has become my friend and colleague. He's John Anthony West, and he had based his research not only on modern Egyptology, but looking at what some of the early founders of Egyptology had suggested, which was that the Sphinx might actually be older than the pyramids. It actually might go back to an earlier period. This is something dismissed by conventional Egyptologists in modern days, but he realized that if there was anything to this, it might be a problem that a geologist could solve. So he invited me to go to Egypt. I first went to Egypt in 1990, looking at the Sphinx from a geological perspective. And lo and behold, I found that there was a lot to learn, and this really set me on a journey that has continued to this day for over 20 years.
So, Dr. Robert, would you say there was an advanced civilization about 10,000 years ago?
Based on my research, yes. And this is an extremely controversial issue for conventional archaeologists and historians, because they believe that civilization began about 5,000, maybe 5,500 years ago. And based on my research, looking at the Great Sphinx in Egypt, redating it based on geological evidence, it goes back thousands of years earlier. It goes back about 10,000 years or so in rough terms. And this really upturns and all conventional wisdom as to when civilization began. It really pushes it back to the end of the last ice age.
So let's get this right. I mean, I've read some of your books, and what you say in there is that there's corrosion that you've been able to determine on the Sphinx, on the pyramids. And why is this corrosion so important to your research?
Well, what's very important to me as a geologist is to look at geological evidence. When I first saw the Sphinx, this is 1990, so over 20 years ago, I saw it, and lo and behold, there is evidence, clear textbook evidence that it was eroded by water. It was eroded by precipitation, rainfall beating down on it. Now, this is totally incompatible with where the Sphinx sits today. It sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert, a hyper-arid region. We know that the Sahara has been a hyper-arid desert for the last 5,000 years. So if it's showing evidence of water erosion, precipitation, it has to go back geologically to a much earlier time period. We know that the Sahara was a Sahara for the last 5,000 years, but before that, there were climatic periods when there was much more moisture, much more rainfall. So this was my first line of evidence. And since then, I've accumulated a number of other lines of evidence showing that the oldest portions of the Sphinx go back to this earlier period. And I do want to mention very quickly, if you look at the Sphinx, it has an Egyptian dynastic head. Well, that's because that head has been recarved, and I'm very comfortable, very certain that that's the case. I've had a chance to walk the Sphinx and study it carefully.
So you're saying it's been recarved, but what was it recarved from?
What I think we had initially was a lion. That's my best hypothesis based on what we now have remaining of the Sphinx. So what has been recarved on the Sphinx is only the head, not the body. and the front paws have been sort of cobbled together and repaired over the thousands of years. So I believe what we had initially was a recumbent lion, probably a male lion with the, big head, big mane, and this whole statue was heavily eroded, heavily corroded, weathered, and to try to repair it in dynastic times, they took this very ancient structure. They tried to repair the body by putting blocks of limestone to fill in some of the gaps where erosion had occurred. The head would have been more difficult to do that way since it was a large head to begin with, and I believe at that time heavily weathered. They simply carved it down. If you look at the head of the Sphinx right now, it is out of proportion to the body. It's too small for the body. And this is one of the indications that, in fact, it's not the original head. They took a larger head that had been heavily eroded, heavily damaged, and recarved it into this smaller human head that now sits on the body.
So from your research, you've gathered that there's been corrosion, there's been alterations of the pyramids. So now these structures of the pyramids and the Great Sphinx, they also fit into the same time frame as other monuments around the world, don't they, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I was criticized for, or one of the questions that was leveled at me when I first started talking about my research on the Great Sphinx and pyramids in the early 1990s, was Egyptologists said to me, well, if this is the case, if these structures go so far back, where is there other evidence of an advanced civilization going back thousands of years earlier than we believe? Where is there evidence of an advanced civilization, say from the 8,000 to 10,000 BC period? And at that time, over 20 years ago, there really wasn't a lot. Since then, a lot more discoveries have been made. One that's incredibly important, in my opinion, is a site known as Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which isn't really not that far from Egypt. When you look at it, it's the northern part of what's known as the Fertile Crescent versus Egypt's in the southern part. This site at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is over 10,000 years old. It's incredibly sophisticated, just as we see in Egypt with the original Sphinx. And it is very well dated independently. It's being excavated by Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute. Impeccable credentials. And here we have confirmation that, yes, at the same time period, things are happening in a very sophisticated manner.
So for there to have been, water corrosion, for example, on the Sphinx or the Great Pyramid, that shows that something significant happened around the world at a point in time to change all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think as a geologist, I'm trained as a geologist, and what I realize, and you realize this studying the geological record, is that we have major earth changes through geologic time. A major thing that happened in the last 10 to 12,000 years is that we went from an ice age to really what's interglacial at the present time from a geologic perspective, but we came out of an ice age, climate changed dramatically, and a real question that geologists have is, how did this change occur so quickly?
So I mean, again, I won't keep going on about this, but it just seems to me that, like you just said there, that there was a major change. You've mentioned that the Ice Age, but what caused the Ice Age? I mean, what would have wiped everything out on the Earth at that point in time and sent us into an Ice Age? I mean, what's your theory on that?
Well, actually, this has been a big issue as to what could cause ice ages to both come and go. Different things have been suggested, very slow cycles of the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. The problem is that doesn't cause the change to happen quickly enough. Other people have suggested comets, for instance. A comet hitting the Earth or exploding in the upper atmosphere could throw dust into the atmosphere. This is a potential way to initiate an ice age. But it's less plausible, in my opinion, geologically, to end an ice age. And what I've really been focusing on recently, and when I say focusing on, looking at data that seems to confirm this, is that in fact the Ice Age, particularly the last Ice Age, the end of the last Ice Age, about 10, 12,000 years ago, happened because of solar disruptions, essentially. The sun, if we could put in anthropomorphic terms, acting up. The sun actually is unstable. It has outbursts on a periodic basis. I'm talking geologically, and there seems to have been a major solar outburst at the end of the last Ice Age.
Well, so basically, if I sum up your work, in a sense, it is to, not to warn people, but to say, if this has happened before, this could happen again, surely.
It could absolutely happen again. And when you start, and I don't want to be an alarmist, and I'm not like that, but I have to look at the data. This is something I've learned over the last few decades of my career. I believe in following the data. When you start looking at the data, and now I'm talking about things like ice cores from Greenland, sediment samples, the archaeological data that I've been putting together, when you look at all the data, there's clear indications that the sun is unstable. It went into a period of heightened activity at the end of the last Ice Age, 10 to 12,000 years ago. There were incredible ramifications of that, I believe, among other things, melting, kilometer-thick glaciers that covered parts of the world, set up. Probably this, in my opinion, this may explain the flood, the stories that we have around the world among myths of floods. It could explain the water erosion on the Sphinx because you have incredible precipitation as you put moisture into the atmosphere. It has to come back down again. So it explains a lot of things without going into great detail here. But a point I want to make is that the sun was then it went into sort of a quiescent period. We are getting active again. The sun is getting active again. It's more active now. And this has been published in several major journals. For instance, Nature, one of the prime journals of the scientific community, that we see more activity in the sun now. Unlike anything for thousands of years, you have to go back to the end of the last Ice Age to see similar activity. So this may be a warning to us.
Okay. Now, your trip that you're going to be taking next year in June into Turkey, just tell us a bit about that and why you're doing that.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. My wife, Katie, and I had the chance to go to Turkey recently, in particular to study the site of Göbekli Tepe. This is this incredible site in southeastern Turkey. It's sort of Stonehenge-like, but way beyond Stonehenge and much earlier, much more sophisticated. It consists of numerous circles of huge megalithic stone pillars and other structures associated with them, and it goes back to the 8 to 10,000 BC range, so the very end of the last Ice Age. So this is a major focus of the trip that I'm taking, and I want to continue my research, my studies of it there. Also, I want people to really learn about this, and I love taking people with me on my research trips, taking people with me to explore these things. So I'll be doing my own research, but we're also going to take a nice tour of many ancient sites in Turkey. One of the beautiful things about Turkey as a country is it has such a rich history, and it really covers the at this point, the extent of much of ancient history that we know about, from the end of the last Ice Age right up to Greco-Roman times. So we're going to be exploring and really getting a good overview of exactly what was happening in the past.
Okay. And as a final message to the audience, what would you like to say?
Well, I think that we really need to pay attention to our past, because the past is not, to me, something that just has, some idle curiosity about. I think we really need to learn from the past, and something that has really been impressed upon me as I've studied these things for decades is that we sometimes have a hubris around us, that we're the most sophisticated people that ever existed on Earth. But in fact, there have been past civilizations of of incredible sophistication. Maybe not exactly like us in that they didn't, maybe they didn't have computers like we do, but they were doing other things, and they could be affected by nature. They could be affected by earth changes. We have to be careful. Other civilizations, I don't mean to sound like doom and gloom, but civilizations have come and gone, and we should learn a lesson from that.
Well, Dr. Robert Schoch, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Now, Dr. Robert Schoch will be holding an expedition to Turkey in June 2012 to explore the ancient sites and geological wonders. For more information on all my guests today, visit my website, themoreshow.co.uk. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on the show. Now, here's the short clip of Dr. Robert Schoch's forthcoming tour. See you next week.
Have you ever dreamed about taking part in creating a new history? Discovering new places and revealing new secrets? You can make your dreams come true. Dr. Robert Schoch and the Time of a New Era company is organizing an amazing tour to Turkey. The main point to visit will be a well-known site called Göbekli Tepe, the newly discovered, incredibly sophisticated, the oldest man-made place of worship yet discovered, dating back to the end of the last ice age.
It's really going to be the opportunity of a lifetime, so I would encourage everyone to try to get on this trip, because I don't know if we're going to be able to do it again. It's really an opportunity not to be missed.
More information about the tour to Turkey you can find on our website, timeofanew-era.com.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.